Hi, and welcome to Watch It Played. My name is Rodney Smith, and in this video, we're going to learn the 2 to 4 player game, Biblios, designed by Steve Finn and published by Yellow, who helped sponsor this video. As the abbot of a monastery, you seek to assemble the most illustrious library and appease the sometimes fickle bishop. So spread out your manuscripts, ink your quill, and join me at the table, and let's learn how to play. To set up, place the scriptorium in the center of the play area with a die on each matching space set to a value of 3. Now separate the cards into 2 piles, one which shows the different values of gold, 1, 2, and 3, which have these images, and all the rest you can just set aside. Now based on the number of players, you'll return a certain number of the gold cards back to the box. In a 2-player game, remove 2 of each value. In a 3-player game, like we're setting up here, remove only 1 of each value, and in a 4-player game, you don't remove any. Now shuffle all the cards together, and if you have 2 players, randomly remove from the deck, unseen, 21 cards. Or 12 if you have 3 players, or 7 if you have 4 players. To help you remember this, you'll find a guide printed here on the inside of the box. The final deck you'll place shuffled face down by the scriptorium, and then you'll pick a random person as the first player. And that's the setup. In Biblios, players will be collecting a variety of cards, some as gifts and some through an auction, and they'll also be able to influence the value of the cards that they're holding and that their opponents have. Also that at the end, their library is worth the most. The game is played in 2 halves, and the first half is called the gift phase. And this will take place over a series of turns, starting with the first player and then going clockwise around and around the table. The first player, known as the active player, will be drawing a number of cards from the deck equal to the number of players plus 1. So in this 3-player game, as the active player, I would draw 4. The catch is that I must take them one at a time, examining secretly and allocating each one before I draw the next. And there are 3 different places I can put the cards I draw. One option is to give it to myself, face down. Of the 4 cards that I'll be drawing, I can only give myself one of them, so if I don't really like the card, I may not want to take it, hoping I'll get something better if I wait. So instead, I can allocate the card face up to the public space. This is an area that my opponents will draw from later. So I will want to put cards here that are not too good. By the end of my turn, I will need to have placed a number of cards in the public space equal to the number of my opponents. So in this case, 2. But instead, I can also assign one of the cards face down into a separate deck known as the auction pile. The cards that end up here will be used in the second half of the game. In this case, I'll put this card in the public space and draw my second card for the turn. Oh, now this one, it's pretty good, so I'm going to keep it. And the next one I draw, well, this one's even better, but I can't take it because I already assigned myself a card. Now, I really don't want to give this to the other players, so I'll put it face down in the auction, and now I'll draw my 4th and final card, and this one must go to the public space, and unfortunately, this one's a pretty good one too. So just to recap, during the gift phase, the active player will draw a number of cards from the deck equal to the number of players plus 1. But they have to draw those one at a time, assigning them each time to one of the 3 different places. Exactly 1 must go into the auction, exactly 1 must go to themselves, and the rest will go to the public space. But they can assign those cards in any order. Once the active player is done, they will then add the card that they gave to themselves to their hand. And starting with the player on their left and going clockwise, each opponent will choose any one available card from the public space to add to their hand. In this way, during every turn of the gift phase, everyone will get 1 new card, including the auction pile. Once the cards have been taken from the public space, a turn ends, and the next person in clockwise order becomes the active player. And then they will draw and assign cards from the deck, as we just saw. Turns will continue like this until eventually this deck is empty, ending the gift phase. And at that point, there'll be a stack of cards in the auction, and each player will have collected a certain number of cards as well. Now you might be wondering, what are the cards in this deck, and how do I know which ones I want to take? Well, let's go back to the table and I'll show you what you'll find. The deck is mostly made up of cards in 5 different colors that represent the 5 different types of resources you'll use to build your library. Holy books, manuscripts, forbidden tomes, pigments, and monks. And these range in value from 1 to 4. You can also examine the inside flap of the box, and it will show you all the cards and their values and how many of each may be in the deck, because don't forget, a random number of cards were removed during the setup. Also notice that not all the types of resources have the same values. For example, this blue suit, known as the pigments, only has 2s, 3s, and 4s, while the green holy books only has 1s and 2s. You'll want to keep this in mind as you're playing. At the end of the game, players will go through all of the cards they've collected and total the value they have in each type. And the player who has the highest total in a type then gains the number of points showing on the matching die. We'll talk more about final scoring later, but this essentially means that the higher valued cards tend to be better. There's also gold in the deck with values from 1 to 3, where again the higher values are better. But these will be used more in the second half of the game, so we'll talk about them when we discuss that phase. However, before we move on, we do need to mention one other type of card you'll find in the deck, the church cards. These will always show 1 or 2 dice in their corner, and they must be resolved as soon as a player acquires them. In other words, if I assign this to the auction, then nothing happens, because no one has it yet. On the other hand, if I assign it to myself, then as soon as I do that, even if I haven't finished assigning other cards this round, then immediately the game pauses and this card is resolved. If I put it in the public space, then once an opponent picks it up from there, then also the game is paused and the church card is resolved. These ones allow you to increase or decrease the value on any single die by 1. Some show 2 dice, so they increase or decrease 2 different dice by 1 each. And finally, this one lets you increase or decrease a single die by 1, your choice when you play it. Once the effect of any one of these cards has been applied, it is then removed from the game. And I should mention that when you receive one of these, you can choose not to use the power of a church card at all and just discard it. But if you do decide to use it, you must fully resolve it. If it says to adjust the value on 2 different dice, then you can't just adjust 1. I'll also point out that the values on the dice cannot be lowered below 1 or increased above 6. So as I previously mentioned, after the gift phase, the original deck will be empty, and now we move to the auction phase where these cards will be shuffled into the finalized auction deck. And the player who started the game as the active player is then the first active player in this phase as well, and they should put the deck in front of themselves and then reveal the top card. The player to their left must then bid at least 1 or pass. And you'll continue like this around and around the table, and each person must bid higher than any previous bids during that auction, or they must pass. And once you pass, you cannot bid on this card again. Now you'll continue like this until there's only 1 player remaining, and then they pay their bid, let's say in this case it was 2, by revealing and discarding any combination of gold cards from your hand that equal or exceed their bid amount. So they could pay with 2 1s or a 2, or they might have to pay with a 3 if, for example, they were not able to make exact change. And if you're forced to pay more than you bid, you do not get the change back. The cards you pay are then removed from the game. The player who won the bid will then place that card into their hand, and then the active player's turn is over, whether they won the bid or not. Now, if the winner of the auction can't pay the bid, maybe it turns out they don't actually have enough gold in their hand, or if they simply choose not to pay their winning bid, even if they have it, then there is a penalty. Each other player now gets to take a random card from that player's hand, and the auctioned card is auctioned again, but the penalized player cannot participate. So you definitely don't want to overbid and then not pay the cost. There's an optional medieval bluff rule you can play with as well, but I'll leave that for you to discover on your own. It's also possible that everyone will pass right away and there's no winning bid, and in that case, the card is removed from the game and the active player's turn is over. When an action round is over, the deck is passed to the next player in clockwise order, and then they become the active player and reveal the next card. Now, it is possible that a gold card will be revealed, in which case the auction is run a little differently. Players will now be bidding on the number of cards they wish to pay. So again, the bidding would start with the player to the left of the current active player, and let's say after a few rounds, this player wins with a bid of 3. They now discard that many of any types of cards from their hand, removing them face down and unshown from the game. They then collect this card and add it to their hand, and now this gold might help them collect other cards later in the auction. Also remember that church cards may be acquired during the auction phase, and these are resolved as soon as a player wins and has paid the auction price for them. The auctions will continue until the auction deck has been exhausted, and then the players will reveal and total all the values they have in each of the different color categories. Now, we won't go through each of the categories, but we'll just go through this first one as an example. The player with the highest total value in a category wins the matching color die, placing it in front of themselves. Now, if 2 players are tied, like we have here, then the tied player in that category that has a letter here closest to A wins the category. So in this case, they would win. And that means that when collecting cards, you'll want to keep this in mind. Lower letters can be more valuable. So let's say the players finished going through all of the categories and things ended up something like this. The player who now has the most total points in front of them on the dice is the winner. In the case of a tie, like we have here, the tied player with the most gold cards remaining in their hand wins. If there's still a tie, the remaining tied players with the highest total value in these monk cards wins. If there's still a tie, then the remaining tied players use the tie-breaking letter on the monk cards to break the tie. If there was still a tie, because none of the tied players had monks, use the next category in the scriptorium to break the tie in the same way, and then the next one, and so on, until a winner is found. Don't worry though, I think you'll find in most cases the first tiebreaker for having the most gold generally does the trick. And that's how you play Biblios. If you have any questions at all about anything you saw here, feel free to put them in the comments below and I'll gladly answer them as soon as I get a chance. You'll also find forums for discussion, pictures, other videos, and lots more over on the games page at Board Game Geek, and I'll put a link to that in the description. And if you found this video helpful, please consider giving it a like, subscribing, and clicking that little bell icon so you get notifications anytime we post a new video. But until the next episode, thanks for watching.